We have spent 16 blissful years together as husband and wife, Carol. Jenny, our lovely 14-year-old daughter, is with us. When Carol first started taking the pill, we both became very involved in our jobs, even though our original goal was to have another child. At some point, we thought we didn't need another child because we were both so content with Jenny. I adore my family dearly and believe that we have a strong marriage and close bond. I've always considered myself fortunate to have a beautiful, intelligent wife, but occasionally I wonder if having a wife this attractive would cause problems. I was always in awe and thrilled that a woman of her beauty chose to wed a plain-looking prude like me. Carol would always laugh when I brought this up, saying, "I guess I just felt sorry for you, Mark. You looked so dejected when I met you that first time, I just had to cheer you up." "Well, you sure did a great job at that," I would smile back. "I love you, Mark," followed by the playful "I love you too," always made us both laugh heartily. After I met you, I've never felt dejected again. "I love you." However, I've been giving her response a lot of thought lately. She was right, you see, when Carol and I first got together, I was depressed. I had recently split up with my college girlfriend of many years. Yes, I had been dumped. I was very attached to her. I was devastated when she decided to end things. After 3 years together, the breakup was very painful for me. Later on, I learned that she had met another man from her hometown and had expressed interest in dating him. She never denied that she enjoyed our time together and that there was no cheating, but she didn't want to continue our long-distance relationship because she would soon be moving back home. Actually, she had taken a break from our classes a few months prior and met this guy. They hadn't had sex, but she was interested and chose to end things rather than be unfaithful to me. It still hurt, but I suppose I respected her for being honest. I graduated from college with a degree in accounting, started working as a single man, and got a job right away before I met Carol. I went on dates with a few women, but I never found someone I truly liked. I rarely had sex, none of the women I worked with piqued my interest. After work, I went out to parties with some friends, but my career was my life, and after a few years, I was earning a respectable salary. My future wife and I met by coincidence. A friend invited me to a party at their house. My friend Jim Simpson, with whom I've been friends since my partying days in college, and his wife Martha repeatedly attempted to put me in touch with some attractive women. I first got to know Carol at one of these house parties. I met her at the party, and we clicked right away. Carol is a tall, vibrant natural blonde with a lovely face and a trim yet athletic build. Jim gestured to her and said that she was available and had broken up with her boyfriend, just like me. It was hard for me to believe she was that beautiful. Carol was friendly, telling me she was majoring in art and soon to graduate. Why would any guy in his right mind break up with a beautiful woman like her, she asked. She was funny, gregarious, easy to talk to, and not just gorgeous and smart. For the most part of the party, we ended up chatting. We soon started dating after she agreed to see me the following weekend. We had sex, and soon after, we started dating. We were a duo. Carol was upfront about her continued relationships with other guys at first, but after several months, we stopped dating. I was, at any rate. She needed a bit more time, and then I realized she was staring at me. When I first met Carol, I had already established myself in my career as a CPA. I believe a major reason Carol decided to marry me was that I was earning a good living and could afford to take her places that her previous boyfriends could not. I know she valued financial stability, so I was pleased when I showed her my new house, my sports car, and some fine dining establishments. I would like to think that my charm and good looks drew her in, but in all honesty, I knew that I was anything but a stud. I was just plain and reserved. She must have enjoyed making love to me, I certainly did. She had dated a lot of guys before me and had a lot more sexual experience than I did, which surprised me because I thought that once we were married, that was it for good and those guys were history. She claimed to have loved me and me alone, and that they were things of the past. I fully accepted her response, and shortly after, I proposed to her. It was the happiest day of my life when she said yes. I had known Jim Simpson for many years. We went out and played on a few sports teams together. We frequently got together to drink and hang out because we lived in the same town. Even though Jim was married at the time, I made an effort to support him after his divorce from Martha started to fall apart. Later on, I discovered that he had been having an affair with Martha, and she had also discovered it. She took my best friend to the dry cleaners and hired a shark for a lawyer. Jim is a larger man than I am, loud and attractive. I noticed that women were drawn to him when we went out together after he became single. He did go out on dates with some pretty attractive women, inviting them over for dinner parties at our house. His relationships were all over in a matter of months. I discussed his issues with Carol, and it was Carol who encouraged me to continue extending our invitations to him. She would not stop telling me that Jim was having a terrible time with his life and that he needed our help. That didn't seem appropriate because I was positive he didn't require assistance in obtaining dates. Carol insisted that we stay close friends and assist him in moving past the painful memories of his divorce. Carol didn't have to worry about him as much, I would often tell her. I never brought up the fact that my friend was a liar, a cheater, and most likely should have gotten a divorce because I didn't want to unfairly disparage him. I mentioned to her that Jim was a handsome single man who had a lucrative job and that it seemed like women were drawn to him wherever we went. She wasn't convinced. Carol said that he was our friend and we couldn't let him down, adding that he had just fallen into a depression due to his failed marriage. I suppose I just agreed with her viewpoint and maintained our friendship. For years, he was my best friend, and to be honest, I was glad to have him in my life. For several years, that was the state of affairs. But during the past few months, things started to shift. Jim appeared frequently as usual, and as had been the case for a while, but Carol continued to bring up his allegedly delicate emotional state more and more. Jim didn't seem depressed at all, so it was odd, but she had been this way for so long that I thought we should just talk about it normally. But as things in our home started to seem even stranger, I started to get suspicious. Even though I was working harder than ever to advance my accounting career, it had stagnated in the last few years. I hadn't received the raise I was due. I continued to make a respectable living, maintain a number of significant clients, and support Carol, Jenny, and myself. Although our finances did not significantly improve, Carol continued to earn a small income from her part-time job at an art studio. The issue was that, despite working long hours, I wasn't earning as much money as I believed I should have after 10 years at my company. I was hoping for a raise to make up for the shortfall, but senior management decided to lay off a number of employees when the economy declined. I was still employed, but my pay was reduced. Fortunately, Carol continued to work, and our way of life at the time was fairly traditional. The issue started when I informed my wife that we would need to make financial cuts. She was shocked to hear that we would have to postpone our yearly vacation. I gave her the rundown and informed her that we would have to give up some other indulgences, like going out so frequently, in addition to our vacation. We used to go out to eat, dance, or see a show every weekend at that time. Carol didn't understand why our finances were in such a terrible shape after all these years of work. I proceeded to clarify to my doubtful partner that my earnings had decreased and my chances of receiving a raise in the near future were dim. Carol had always led a socially engaged life. Among her many friends were some rather snobby ones. She enjoyed dressing up and going to fancy social gatherings. In the past, when she accepted invitations to some kind of gala, I grudgingly followed her wishes. But we had to make some cuts somewhere because of my decreased income, our rather large mortgage, our car payments, and my obligations to our daughter's education fund. When I told Carol we could no longer afford to live our luxurious lifestyle, she was not happy. When I suggested she and her friend skip some of the pricey restaurants, she was shocked. Naturally, that discussion turned into a disagreement and, in the end, a major altercation about our future. Initially, I didn't find it strange that my friend Jim was present for some of these confrontations. It was inevitable that he would hear some of these conversations because he was visiting our home multiple times a week at the time. When he appeared to support Carol's position, it was a bit awkward. He didn't make it clear. He would listen to Carol and me as we talked about our problems for a while before making an occasional remark that at first glance appeared to be supportive. However, upon further reflection, it appeared that he consistently agreed with Carol. Carol turned to Jim and inquired about his feelings when I mentioned that we had cancelled our outings with our friends. The big man would appear thoughtful, but in the end he would come to Carol's conclusion. He would restate her claims and, if necessary, even offer to assist us financially. That was not an answer I liked. He continued by offering to take us somewhere if we wanted to go out. Jim even offered to pay the cover charge if Carol and I decided to attend a club that charged one. He would, if needed, foot the bill for a gift of some kind if we were invited to a party so we wouldn't have to go empty-handed. I said no thanks, but I did thank him. I wanted to please my wife, but I found it annoying that he was always offering to help us out financially. I had no doubt that he could afford to assist us. He had quit his old job and was reportedly making good money in a sales position. Carol invited Jim over for dinner one evening without telling me, something that now happens quite frequently. She was a wonderful hostess, as usual. As we finished Carol's delicious dinner, we had a nice conversation. Our daughter disappeared into the living room to finish her homework, and we cracked open a bottle of wine. Carol reminded me of the annual charity event that was coming up as soon as we finished pouring our wine and took our seats. We attended it annually, but I had completely forgotten about it. I listened as she talked about how wonderful the event was and how many of our friends would be there. I was already aware of the event's existence and the admission price. Jim jumped up when I told him that this month we couldn't afford a party of any kind. He acknowledged that he could understand my reluctance, but added that it would be a shame not to make a contribution as it was a charitable event. Carol listened to him with great anticipation, a joyful expression on her face. Carol was overjoyed when my friend offered to help us out with the expense. But me, I was mad as hell. He knew exactly how we were doing financially and how I felt about it. I guess I thought my best friend would agree with me, but she didn't. Carol listened to my protests in silence, then glared at me before turning to face Jim. They exchanged a look that made me suspicious right away. "Come on, Mark," Jim sternly commanded. "You know this is an annual event, and one that we've never missed. It'd be a shame not to go over just a few bucks. We've been going for years." Although I was also disappointed, I understood that we had to reduce our spending in order to make the large mortgage payment that month. Carol patted my hand and said, "Sweetheart, we just have to go. I know it will be a little tight, but everyone we know will be there." Jim chipped in, "You know the guys would love to see you, Mark. I know they're all looking forward to it. It'll be a blast." Carol cried, "We had so much fun last year, remember, honey," before I could respond. Carol scowled with a determined glare as I shook my head no. She said, "I'm serious, Mark. We have to go, honey. All our friends will be there, and I've already spoken to Mary. I don't want them to think that we don't contribute to charity." "Everyone wants to give to charity," I responded, "but I was thinking that if we don't get our finances together, we'll be the ones that have to accept charity. It's just not in the budget this year." I told them straight out, "Maybe next year, but it's going to be so much fun," Jim grinned. "It will, of course," Carol answered. She turned to Jim with a pout. "But darn it, Mark just doesn't want to go." Before I could respond, Jim questioned my choice once more. My wife started to gripe about how inexpensive I was. Nothing she said was classified as confidential. I had been withholding certain expenses from her. She looked at Jim and said multiple times that I had refused to let her have what she wanted. "You see, Jim, he's getting cheap in his old age, and I'm trying to enjoy a great social life," she said, turning her back on me. Carol gave me the impression of an obnoxious old man. I did my best to respond coolly, but it was challenging. "I'm not cheap, Carol, just realistic. Despite what you think, we're in a bit of a slump. Spending money we don't have is just stupid in our situation. I don't want us to overextend ourselves," Jim said, "but think of all the good that we can contribute, honey, very rapidly. You know it's a charity event, right, Mark?" With a frustrated "of course, I do," I said. "But it's $75 a plate, then there's the parking fee at the club, and after an expensive dinner that we can't afford, there's the charity auction. We'll be expected to bid on overpriced items that we'll never use, charity or not. We can't afford it." That sparked a contentious conversation about my lowered status and pay at work. Jim was aware of part of it already, but I was embarrassed about these delicate matters and wanted them to stay private. Carol was now really ranting because she smelled blood. She expressed her open dissatisfaction with our way of life and her disappointment with me to Jim. It was too late, but I didn't want her to tell anyone about that stuff. I acknowledged that in order to ensure that Jenny's education was covered and that we could pay our mortgage, we had to make some financial adjustments. I thought that would help my wife see things more clearly, but she didn't seem to care. "See what I mean?" Carol sneered, gazing hopefully at Jim. He always comes up with some dumb excuse not to go out, countering my arguments and totally dismissing my concerns. Carol was gazing hopefully at Jim, waiting for him to say something to support her. Jim glanced at her and then looked at me with a sympathetic look. "Well, Mark, why don't I cover you then?" he quickly offered. "I don't want to go by myself, and I have the cash." "It's not a problem. It'd be my pleasure to take you and Carol out to this event. You know we always have fun. I'd be disappointed if you weren't there. After all, you've been there for me for the past year after my divorce, so in a way, I'll be paying you back. I'd love to take you both to keep me company. I'll drive and even pay for the babysitter too, really." Carol squealed, "Oh, gosh, Jim, that's wonderful. Thank you so much." Before I could reject his offer, she ran around the table, hugged the guy, and kissed him, crying repeatedly, "Thank you, Jim, thank you." I was steaming, not just about Jim contradicting my decision, but also by Carol's gleeful reaction to his offer. She cared nothing about my opinion and practically threw herself at him right now. She was gushing openly like he was her savior. I shot Jim a look of disapproval as Carol continued to hug him. Carol squealed, and Jim bashfully accepted her praise, while I sat across the table feeling angry and disgusted. Despite what Carol said, I had no intention of accepting anyone's charity, even if it was from a friend. I was most put off by Carol's exuberant physical response. By now, Jim had his arm around her waist as she kissed his cheek and hugged him warmly. In no uncertain terms, I quickly rejected his offer. My pride wouldn't let me accept a handout from anybody. They stopped hugging, and Carol considered me coolly. "Come on, Mark," Jim said. "Don't be upset." Noticing my dark expression, he told me with a smile, "Let's just go to that thing and have some fun. We can worry about the money later." "No way, damn you." "I'm serious about this," Carol declared. "Oh, just be quiet, Mark. You can pout about this all you want, but we're going, and that's final." "We'll see about that," I said. She looked at me like I was crazy. She got a weird look on her face, shook her head, and pulled away from Jim's embrace. Then she trotted to the kitchen, grabbed her cell phone, and called up one of her friends. With Carol in the other room, Jim and I sat there in silence. I glared at him across the table as we both heard my wife in the other room chattering away. He looked a little uncomfortable as Carol chatted excitedly with her friend. "Oh yes, we're going, I told you we would," she cried into the phone. "Oh yeah, I know, well, not really, but I told you we were going." "I know what you thought, girl, but I knew Jim would come through for us. He's been such a good friend." "No, I don't think so, but you know how we can." Her voice suddenly slipped to a lower volume, so I couldn't hear her anymore. Then Carol peeked into the living room and glanced over at me with a smug look. She spoke quietly into the phone as she headed back into the other room for privacy. After that confrontation, the friendship Jim and I shared was broken. I thought as my buddy, he would have taken my side, but he didn't seem to be bothered about ignoring me. He tried a few times to explain that he just wanted Carol and me to have a good time, so I should just accept it. In my mind, he had taken sides, and it wasn't with me. A while later, my wife came back into the room with a huge smile on her face. She once again thanked Jim, hugging him and kissing his cheek. It seemed a bit over the top to me when she didn't seem to want to leave his embrace. I told them again that we're not going, and that was my decision. Jim tried to intervene, and Carol kept hugging him, informing me that she was going and wouldn't hear of it. I kept shaking my head no, but both Jim and my wife weren't listening. I guess they were determined to use the time before the event to get me to change my mind. Looking back, that argument may have been the beginning of the end of my once happy marriage. The week before the charity event was frosty in our house. Even our daughter Jenny noticed the deep freeze. She was 14, but she wasn't stupid. She knew about the charity event and knew there was a simmering issue between Carol and me that wasn't being resolved. "What's the matter, Dad?" she asked one day when Carol was out of the room. "I know that you and Mom are arguing about something." "She wants to accept charity, and I don't want to," I said. "Charity? You mean welfare or something?" "Not exactly, but it might as well be welfare," I told her. "I wasn't brought up to depend on anyone. It's a matter of pride, darling. Once you start taking money from people, it's hard to stop. I've never accepted charity in my life and don't intend on starting now." "It's about that charity event, isn't it?" "Yes, we simply can't afford it, Jenny. I'm not taking a handout just to put on a big show for our friends." "But Mom said it's from Uncle Jimmy," she replied, studying my reaction. "He's your friend, isn't he? I'm sure he doesn't think it's charity, just one friend helping another. Is that how your mother sees it?" Jenny lowered her eyes. "Well, we spoke about it a little." That wasn't any surprise. Carol was pleading her case to get Jenny on her side behind my back. Knowing my clever wife was using my daughter to influence me pissed me off. "I'm sure your mom has told you all about it," then I said, holding my temper, "but no matter if it's from a friend or not, it's still charity. I don't want to raise you thinking that we are that hard up. My dad never accepted charity his whole life, and he had more problems than we do." "But Dad, it's just a party. It's not like we're accepting cash, you know? And Uncle Jimmy is our friend." I was getting annoyed that she kept referring to Uncle Jimmy. "I guess that's how Carol must refer to him when I'm not around," I answered my daughter with a little more anger than should have. "If your Uncle Jimmy," I sneered, accentuating his label, "was my really friend, he'd keep his big mouth shut, his nose out of my affairs, and leave my family alone." My bitter reply caught Jenny off guard, and she drew back, looking scared. Then she ran up to her room and closed her door. I felt bad for speaking so bluntly, but I was sick of hearing about Uncle Jimmy and his gratuities. I needed my family to support my decision, although it seemed it wasn't the case. Each day, Carol kept smirking at me. I kept insisting that we weren't going to any charity event, with or without Jim's help. Each time we had that discussion, she shot me a dark look, and we had another argument. A few days before, Carol addressed me with undisguised aggravation. "Listen, Mark," she said. "I don't know why you got your panties in such a bunch about this. You know we go to this event every year, and I don't intend to miss it this year. Despite your problems at work, I know we're having a little financial difficulty right now. I get it. But we're certainly not poor, and we still need to keep up appearances. If we don't attend, all my friends will be aware of our problems. They'll be talking about us, about me, and I don't want to hear the gossip about it later. Jim has offered to help us out, and if you're the man I thought I married, you will accept it with a smile." "So that's it," I blurted out angrily. "I'm not man enough now?" "Oh, Mark, will you just stop?" "Of course, you are. Just grow up." "Then it's all about the gossip?" "Not all about it, but yes, I want our family to look good, and I do want to be considered a valued member of our social group. We have made a lot of friends over the years, and I want to go have an enjoyable evening with them." "Don't you want to be seen with me?" "That's not fair, and you know it." "Of course, I want to be seen with you. I love you and always have. But this argument has gotten me quite pissed off. I thought you would support your husband as a good wife should and try to understand our situation. I can see that's not the case. So if you want to disrespect me this much, just go without me, you aioli, she cried angrily. You think I'm not a good wife? That's a bunch of and you know it. For 16 years, I've taken care of you and Jenny without so much as a complaint. Lord knows I could have complained about a lot of things, but haven't. Like what? I demanded. She gazed at me with an icy glare. For a moment, she didn't speak. The silence was deafening as I waited her out. So you're going to the mat on this, are you? She said bitterly. I thought I could convince you that it would be good for us to have a night out together. More knows that hasn't happened lately. You haven't taken me out on a real date in months, and I'm sick of it. That's a lie. We go out to dinner as a family every week. We also go out dancing on occasion, just not to those posh, expensive joints you're hooked on. I told you, Carol, we can't afford that right now. Once Jenny's education is taken care of, I'm sure things will loosen up. Carol looked like she bit into a lemon as she listened to me. She seemed to come to a decision and suddenly calmed down. But the triumphant look on her face was troubling. So, my dear husband, if you aren't going to give me this one night out, then I guess I'll have to be Jim's date. I'm sure he'll be proud to have me, even if you aren't. And don't think it's going to be a platonic date, either. I'm going to give your buddy all the attention that I would have given you, and I know he's going to appreciate it. You witch! I snapped with more anger than I felt in a while. I should have known you had this in your head. Don't let me stop you. Then go out with him, but don't think I'll forget this sordid betrayal. And I won't forget Uncle Jimmy's part in this either. I stormed out of the room and slammed the door as she yelled, "You aioli! I'm going, damn it!" Well, that didn't go well at all, as I stomped away. I passed by the living room. Jenny was watching TV. I know she heard the whole argument. When she glanced over at me with a frightened look, I wanted to hug and console her, to soothe her fears. But I was too worked up at my stubborn wife to say anything nice, so I just went out on the patio and sat in a chair, steaming. The day before the charity event found our house bitter cold. Jim called me a few times during the week to convince me to change my mind. I wasn't having it, and the last time, I just hung up on him. Our finances were shaky enough, and we simply had to cut back. I had to face facts to keep our family secure, even if my wife wouldn't. If she wanted to make an issue about this, then she was going to get her wish. The night of the event, I'm sure Carol fixed dinner, but I made it a point to stay away and eat out at some cheap place. That night, I got home after Jenny and my wife finished eating. I mumbled some greeting, and Jenny said, "Hi, Dad." Carol didn't speak to me, she simply went into the bedroom and locked the door. As she got ready for her date with Jim, to keep me from causing a scene, Carol decided to drive over to Jim's house and leave from there. When she came downstairs to leave, she made sure to strut around the living room, displaying her sexy attire. If I wasn't pissed off before, I was livid now. She had on a short, tight aqua dress I'd never seen before. It was shockingly brief and displayed her curves like it was painted onto her slender body. Her long hair was flowing, her makeup was fixed, and the high heels she had on made her shapely legs look great. "Where'd you get that dress?" I asked. "Don't worry about it." "Where'd she get the money to buy such an obviously expensive dress?" But she wasn't going to tell me, so I kept quiet. Carol ignored me as she went to where Jenny was sitting in front of the TV, leaned down, and gave our daughter a kiss. "Wow, you look wonderful, Mom. You look like a movie star in that dress," Jenny said. "Thanks, dear." Carol's smile disappeared as she glanced pointedly over at me. She told Jenny loud enough for me to hear, "I know Uncle Jim will think so too. I just wish everybody felt the same way." Of course, that comment was directed at me, and I was furious. Unlike when we went out, Carol never looked this good on any of our dates. But for Uncle Jim, she went all out. I could see this was going to be an issue. I just looked at her with disgust and walked out of the room. I wanted her to know I was angry, and she definitely knew it. Goodbye, Jenny, Carol said, walking to the door, speaking to my daughter and ignoring me. I may be out late, honey, so don't wait up. She walked out the door and didn't look back. Jenny saw my dismal look and shot me a look of pure pity, which again pissed me off. I knew she hated being in the middle of this, and I wasn't happy either. Something about my daughter pitying me made me even more angry. I marched to the den and shot off a quick text to my former best friend. I thought we were friends, Jim. Now that you're dating my wife, I know you're just another SA-hole. After tonight, don't bother contacting me, and don't consider yourself my friend. You're not welcome here ever again. Have a good time with my witch of a wife, you prick. I quickly got one back. It's not a date, Mark, and you know it. I wanted you to come, but you're too stubborn. I'm just letting Carol have some fun, and then I'll make sure she gets home safe. We'll have to talk later. Please don't be upset with me. I sent back, screw you. I didn't hear back. I tried to keep my mind off my wife, but it was impossible. Jenny and I watched TV for a while and tried to converse like nothing was wrong. I don't even know what we watched, she could tell I was upset. To her credit, Jenny spoke kindly to me and tried to make me feel better. I was pleased about that, but it wasn't going to be a good night, and we both knew it. Around 10, Jenny went to bed. It was early for her. The situation was so awkward, I guess she couldn't take the tension. I could hear her talking on her cell phone with somebody when I went to bed. Somehow, I managed to sleep, but I was woken up by the noise of the front door closing. I glanced at the clock and saw it was 2:30 in the morning. I could hear voices downstairs and knew it was my wife and my former friend. I rolled out of bed and glanced into the living room. They were still near the front door, and it was clear Carol was sloppy drunk. So drunk and unstable, she was hanging onto Jim's arm for support. Her hair was messed up, her eyes were droopy, and she was swaying and giggling. Thank you for such a wonderful time tonight, Jimmy, she laughed, slurring her words and hugging him close. She threw her arms around his neck, pressed her lean body against his, and gave him a steamy kiss on the lips. It lasted far longer than was proper, and Carol didn't seem like she wanted it to end. Finally, Jim pulled back and glanced around tentatively. It was fun, but it's late, and you should get to bed now, Carol. But I don't want to go to bed, Mark might be worried about you, she said. Screw him, she sneered with a giggle. He's a wet blanket, and I had so much fun with you tonight. Let's do it again, okay? I was at the top of the stairs where they couldn't see me. Jim looked uneasy as he glanced toward the hallway. He knew our bedroom was located. He couldn't see me, but he was probably wondering if I was listening to them. Let's not talk about that now, he told her. Go get a shower, get some sleep, and try to make up with your husband. Screw that a-hole, she slurred, and again fell into his arms. Why don't you stay and have a drink with me? It's not that late, honey. No, I don't think that's such a great idea. You know he's upset, right? I showed you his text earlier, he's having a snit. I don't care. Why don't we go over to the sofa, and I'll get you a drink, please? Carol murmured and pulled his head down for a kiss. This time, Carol French kissed him for a bit before he pushed her away. Please, Carol, I'm trying to keep us out of trouble, he chuckled. You're making that real hard right now. I was already pissed, but I was dumbfounded when I saw her hand move between them and clutch his tool through his trousers. I can tell you're hard and big, too, she giggled merrily. In fact, I've known you were quite big every time we danced together. Come on, don't go yet, Jim was smirking but pulled her hand off his tool and said, you better stop. Come on, Jim, I can tell you want to stay. Let me go to the sofa and show you how much I appreciate all the attention you showed me tonight. No, I'm serious, Carol, Jim said, looking more worried. I know you're a beautiful woman and I'm horny, sure, but I don't want to cause any more trouble with Mark. We are friends, you know, and you're my friend too, Carol slurred, with her hand onto his crotch. Mark's asleep, and he doesn't give a damn about me. I want you to be my special friend, Jim, Please, come and stay for a little while. I couldn't take any more of this. I stepped into the room with a look of hate on my face. Yeah, Jim, I said curtly, startling them both. Why don't you be Carol's special friend, you Aoli? Jim and Carol both jumped at my presence. In a sarcastic tone, I continued, why don't you stay for a little while and screw my cheap drunk 304 of a wife after such a nice date? I'm sure she'll love that. Jim's eyes widened, and his face fell. He pushed my wife away, and Carol gazed at me with bloodshot eyes, trying to focus. It took a moment for her to regain her composure and sober up a little. Listen, Mark, Jim started to say. No, you listen, you face, I cut in. I can see now just how much of a special friend you were to my wife. So just screw her, take her over to the sofa, and give the filthy 304 what she wants, Jim. Jim shook his head sadly and turned to leave. Carol cried, I know, grabbed his arm, and pulled him back. Just shut up, Mark. Jim was nice to me all night, and he doesn't deserve this. Then give him what he deserves, which, I cried. You want his big hard meat, so go for it, you cheating 304. Damn you, a hole! Carol screamed, her face red as a beet. Jim just wanted to crawl in a hole. Listen, Mark, Jim said apologetically. I know you're upset about tonight and all, but we did have a great time, and nothing happened. I have your word on that, right? Shithead, I sneered. I'm sure I can trust you, yeah, nothing happened. I know this looks bad, Carol said angrily. Why, Uncle Jim? I asked angrily. Why does it look bad? Because my 304 is trying to give you a hand job and maybe a blowjob for being so nice? Or because she's taking you over to the sofa to enjoy sex, is that it, Uncle Jim? Jim looked at Carol, then at me. He shook his head and headed for the front door to make his escape. On the way, he said to me, No, Mark, listen. I've got to go, he told my drunk wife. I better go now, Carol. I'll help you to get your car later if you want. I think he was going to say more but saw my glare and instead he twisted away from Carol's grasp and hustled out the front door. As it closed behind him, Carol seemed to deflate. She looked drunk and dejected as she stumbled into the kitchen to get some water, probably to sober up. I left her there by herself and trudged back to bed. My marriage was no longer on solid ground. Carol woke up on the sofa, she never made it upstairs. I found her lying there the next morning, sprawled out in her new dress. I tried to hold in my anger as I helped her up to the bedroom and flopped her onto the bed. I didn't undress her and left her lying in that tight, obviously expensive aqua dress. I did take off her high heels and pull the cover over her. Carol slept until the late afternoon, painfully hungover, and I could understand why after watching her drunken performance last night. I was angry as hell that she just threw herself at Jim but decided not to act like I was. I wanted to see how she would play it before tipping my hand. I knew our relationship had been off for quite a while. The argument about the charity event was just the latest disagreement. It was, however, the biggest argument we had ever had. Carol finally made it up for dinner and looked like she didn't want to speak because she didn't want to. I just kept silent, determined to make her bring up her disgusting behavior. She slept in the guest room, and the rest of the weekend, we tiptoed around each other. She was so drunk I'm not sure Carol even remembered much about that night. She's not a drinker, so whatever she consumed that night probably had her nearly blacking out. Saturday morning, I made Jenny and me breakfast. She mentioned Carol coming home with Jim and asked what the argument was about. I didn't offer much of an explanation, just that we're still working through the charity event issue. Jenny accepted that vague explanation and left the house early. She told me she was going to go over to a friend's. I told her to call in a few hours to check in. I went to work Monday as usual. Carol took a while to recover and didn't go to work until Wednesday. We didn't speak about that night until the middle of the next week. I think it took her that long to clear her head from all the alcohol she drank. She acted embarrassed when she tried to apologize for her behavior. I was still too angry to accept any apology. I let her tell me that she was sorry, then spun around and left her standing there. That pissed her off, but I didn't care anymore. Jim called me a couple of times. I ignored his calls and let them go to voicemail. I listened as he apologized about how that night turned out and that he wanted to talk about it. He wanted to meet me, but I never responded. I'm sure he wanted to soften the guilt he felt for betraying me. I didn't give a damn about him anymore. As far as I was concerned, our friendship was over. One evening, when I was out washing the car, I went inside for something and heard Carol speaking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was there, so I tried to listen to her conversation. Yes, it was wonderful, she told whoever she was speaking to. I know he's still pissed at me. Ha ha, you think? Thanks. No, Mark didn't get it, it was Jim that bought it for me. Yeah, I know, it cost a fortune. He's such a sweetheart and so handsome. I would have, ha ha, but Mark woke up as I was trying to get him to. Yeah, I know, Mark saw me trying to get him, and yes, I know, yeah ha ha ha. Oh, it sure was, not only big but hard too, real hard. My 304 wife was talking to one of her girlfriends about Jim's meat. Oh, Mark would have a fit if he knew that. No, you can't tell him, no ha ha, I have to keep that quiet. I hope he does. We're trying to figure out when. I know, but I have to be careful. Mark doesn't know yet. He called me, he's been calling me all week. I don't know if I can. Of course, I want to, who wouldn't want to date a guy like Jim? You better not, I'm serious, okay? I know. She chatted a little more, but I'd heard enough. I was almost sure she was going to date my ex-friend. I could hardly believe how much our marriage had crumbled in the last few weeks. I caught Carol on the phone a couple more times. Whenever I entered the room, she'd either turn away and speak softly or simply hang up. On the weekend, Jim suddenly showed up at our house in his big SUV. I was in the driveway fiddling with my car when he pulled in front of the driveway. He got out of his big car and strode up our walk, smiling as if everything was fine. Carol must have known he was coming because the second he got out, she immediately came outside with a weird smile on her face. We haven't been speaking, so when she approached me and began to speak to me, I was immediately on my guard. Hi honey, I invited Jim over for dinner, she told me flat out. When I started to object, she held up her hand to stop me. Listen Mark, I know what you're going to say. You're still upset about that night, but I think that you two need to talk. Jim wants to, we need to get over this and get back to being friends again. Jim was a few feet away and smiled as he approached. Hi Mark, he said, good-naturedly and held out his hand. Nice to see you again, buddy. I just stared at that idiot with a cold look, trying to defuse the situation. Carol moved next to me with a sweet smile and slipped her arm around my waist. She whispered, go on, honey, with a big smile as she tried to coax me forward to shake his hand. I just let it hang there in the air and ignored it. Jim's smile disappeared as he realized the insult and lowered his hand next to me. My wife tried to soften the tense atmosphere. Hi Jim, she gushed, ignoring my harsh glare. Nice to see you. I'm glad you came over today. I was just telling Mark, it was time to clear the air. And screw you, I snapped. Carol was startled, her bright smile wilted a bit. Please, Mark, Jim said. I know you're still upset, but... Oh, you got that, did you? I felt my wife's arm tighten around my waist. She snuggled against me, trying to keep me from getting any angrier. Please, honey, Carol purred, pressing my arm against her breast. She tried to kiss my cheek. Don't be mad at him, it's my fault what happened, not his. Jim's been your friend for so long, and I know you miss him. He misses you too, right Jim? That's right, Jim quipped. Come on, Mark, no hard feelings, right, buddy? I shot him a look that could kill, then I twisted out of Carol's grasp. I looked straight into his eyes, wishing I could shoot this creep. In an ominous tone, I asked him, "So tell me, buddy, did you have a good time with my wife at the charity event?" "Well, yeah, of course we did," Carol chirped. "We wanted you to come, Mark. It would have been more fun if you were there. Honey, you would have loved it." She hadn't spoken to me in nearly a week, and now she was acting all sweet and innocent. I didn't believe her for a second. Jim gazed tentatively at me, and I looked right back in his eyes. "So, you danced, who? Did you dance the slow songs, Jim, old buddy? Hold Carol in your arms, feel her tits against your chest in that skimpy dress she had on." His face twisted into a strange grimace. He was uncomfortable, perplexed by these probing questions. "No, nothing like that, Mark," he replied innocently. "Just, dancing and having a good time, nothing inappropriate." I glared at his face for a moment longer, then I pushed Carol away so she was next to him and turned my attention to her. "And you, my dear, honest wife," I sneered, "was it all just some casual, friendly dancing like Jim said? Just two friends engaged in some platonic activity, nothing inappropriate, right?" "Of course not, Mark," she blustered. "I'd never do anything to disrespect you, honey, you know that." I pulled out my cell phone and opened up a picture. A guy I knew was at the event with his wife. At my request, he sent me a few incriminating photos of my wife in the a-hole. I turned the phone so Carol could see it. It took my wife a moment to realize it was her and Jim dancing close at the charity event. Suddenly, the blood drained from her face, and her eyes bugged out. "So, my faithful wife dancing like this with my dear old friend is just some platonic dancing, right, honey?" I snickered sarcastically as she gazed at the phone. Jim moved closer so he could see, and his face went dark. "Where did you get this?" he asked. It was a side shot of Carol and Jim on the dance floor. Couples were dancing all around them. Some were glancing with amusement at my wife and my former friend engaged in an intimate embrace. Jim's taller than me, and he towered over Carol, but that didn't stop her from sliding her arms around his neck, pressing her lithe body against his, and Jim leaning down to kiss her on the lips. It was a still shot, so there was no way to know how long the kiss lasted, but to someone who didn't know them, it was very incriminating. Carol's face blanched as she saw how intimate their embrace was, not to mention the kiss. I heard Jim gulp. "Oh boy." I flipped another picture and asked Carol, "My dear, I guess you enjoyed that kiss by how you were gazing up into his eyes." The next shot was closer, with only their upper bodies in view. Jim's hands were placed around her waist, and Carol was gazing up at him with adoration in her eyes. A couple next to them was watching with smiles on their faces. I flipped another picture, and this one had them sitting in a booth. Jim's arm was around her shoulders, his hand hovering over her breast. Carol was leaning against his shoulder, her face turned up to his as if expecting another kiss. The last was a shot of them outside on a patio. They were hugging, with Carol making no effort to pull away. Jim's hand was on her bum this time, as she leaned against his tall frame. They weren't kissing, but seemed about to. Both Jim and my wife were stunned at the photos. Jim's face flushed with embarrassment, and he began making choking sounds as if trying to speak. Carol had deflated with shame but seemed to regain her composure first. "Who sent them to you? What difference does that make?" "Well, I know that looks bad, honey," she mumbled, "but it's really not like that at all." "Oh, really, Carol?" I said in disbelief. "It sure looks like my wife and my former friend were having an intimate date, making out, fondling each other, and who knows what else, probably screwing in the parking lot, something you invited him to do on our sofa. Remember that, you stupid witch." I gazed straight into Carol's eyes as she lowered hers. "I can't believe you acted like a 304 right in front of people we know. Did you get a nice feel of his big hard tool, honey? Were you going to screw him when you got home, or was that the second time he would have gotten lucky that night?" Jim blurted out, "No way, Mark. I know that looks bad and all, but it really wasn't like that at all. No one thought we were a couple, we just had a few too many drinks, and we were having fun." And Carol cut in, "Yes, Mark, it was more my fault than Jim's, she explained, trying to sound reasonable. I probably had too much to drink, and I got a little frisky, but nothing happened, honey, only a little kiss and a bit of hugging, you know, probably a little inappropriate, but nothing to worry about. Did you get a good feel of his big meat, Carol? Her jaw dropped. Jim frowned with irritation. Listen, Mark, that's not fair. Not fair? I cried loud enough that both of them cringed. My wife glanced around in embarrassment, afraid the neighbors would hear me and come out to investigate. I was hoping they would. Please, Mark, not so loud, she whispered. Can we go inside to talk about this? Hell no, I yelled. I'm fine right here. I don't want to see a hole in my house ever again. I turned to her and asked, so, Carol, honey, let me ask you another question. Where'd you get that green dress you wore, you know, the one with your tits hanging out? I know I can't afford it, and doubt you can either. My question caught her completely off guard. Carol's eyes widened with a stunned look, and her jaw dropped. I heard Jim gulp, and he seemed to slump a bit. No answer? I said accusingly. I turned to Jim, whose eyes were darting around with guilt all over his face. Did you buy her that dress, a hole? Don't try to lie, you creep. Well, he started to say, glancing over at Carol. My wife stopped him with a wave and said softly, yes, he did, Mark, her eyes lowered. I needed something nice to wear, and I haven't bought anything new in ages. The dress was a gift from Jim, and I knew you wouldn't like it, so I decided not to tell you. And those hooker heels you had on, the ones that made you stand about 5 inches taller and made you look like a cheap $20 escort? Come on, Mark, Jim said with irritation, they're not like that. Carol's flushed face and darting eyes told me all I needed to know. I see exactly how it is, you witch, I snapped at her. He basically bought you that night, and you tried to reward him later. You know that's what paid escorts do, don't you? He paid for you, and you tried to screw him. Carol's shame seemed to wilt her face grew hard, and her eyes were blazing. Jim tried to say, please, Mark, there's no call for that now. I spun around to him and shouted, you made my wife a 304, and you have the nerve to tell me there's nothing wrong. You're a real creep. I wish you were dead, both of you. One of our neighbors was watching from the porch. Carol noticed that we had an audience, she blushed and looked embarrassed. I had nothing more to say to those two and jumped in my car to leave. Jim moved quickly and tried to grab my arm. When he pulled me back, I twisted around and took a swing at him. I missed, and he shoved me to the ground before I could swing again. He could have flattened me with one punch. The guy is taller and bigger than me by at least 40 pounds, not only bigger but more muscular and athletic. A physical confrontation would only make me look foolish. I got up and brushed myself off as he held his hands in a defensive manner, trying to calm me down. As for turning my wife into a 304, I said, glancing at Carol with disgust, well, a-hole, you're definitely doing a great job. She was staring at me with a shocked expression. The neighbors on the porch were clearly interested. Now another couple from down the street was walking by and watching the argument closely. You're his 304 now, wit! I yelled loud enough for our audience to hear. He paid for your dress, your hooker heels, and your date, so just take him inside and give him the payoff, some of your leaking holes, or give him a blowjob. We all know that's what you wanted to do that night, right? I moved toward my car, and this time he didn't interfere. Another neighbor peeked out their door, wondering about all the commotion. Carol was blushing pink as she noticed that we had an even larger audience now. One thing I learned about her recently was how important her reputation was to her. This public airing of our differences was probably killing her. Mark, please stop it, honey, she pleaded in a whisper. Don't go away yet. It's not like that. Let's go inside and talk this out. Yeah, Mark, we really need to clear the air, man, the a-hole agreed. I looked at them both like they were a piece of expletive on my shoe. Yeah, I want to finish this, I told him bitterly. So, if you're still here when I get back, I'm going to get my gun and blow you away. You clear about that, Jim? Jim gazed at me in silence. Carol looked sullen and angry. I spit at their feet, jumped in my car, pulled out of the driveway, and sped off, burning rubber in the process. Our neighborhood would have juicy gossip for months. When I got home that night, Jim was gone, Carol was in bed, and I was smashed to the gills. I had a cab bring me home because I was too drunk to drive, and the bartender wouldn't let me out of the bar with my car keys. I fell onto the sofa and didn't wake up until about noon the next day. I quickly called in sick to work. My boss was pissed, but there was no way I was able to perform being so hungover. I also took the next day off too because I still wasn't right. I finally woke up and got some food in my stomach. That seemed to help. Carol was gone to her part-time job at the art gallery, and Jenny was at school. I guess I was feeling a little guilty about my behavior. I don't know why, though. I still blamed Carol and Jim for the problem. When Jenny returned home from school, I apologized for my loud confrontation. She acted like it was no big deal, but I knew she had probably witnessed the whole thing and heard everything I said to her mother and Uncle Jimmy. We spoke about it for a while and then left it alone. I fixed dinner before Carol got home. She wasn't home on time, and Jenny and I ate dinner without her. I was still pissed, but my hangover softened my anger a bit because when my wife finally did make her appearance, I didn't confront her again and just left her alone. We ate, cleaned up the dishes, and went to sleep that night without touching each other or even speaking. Then the next day, we tried to act normal for Jenny's sake, and the atmosphere about the house was a bit better. She did make sort of an apology, saying she was sorry I didn't attend the event, and no matter how bad those pictures looked, nothing inappropriate went on between Jim and her. I noted that she didn't say she was sorry she went, just that she was sorry how it worked out. I let her speak and didn't offer an answer. A few days later, I heard her on the phone again. She thought I was in the backyard and didn't notice I was around the corner when she was speaking openly. "It's okay, yeah, I can talk," she said. "He's out in the yard, but I'm not sure where he is now." "Okay, that's okay." "Right, call me." "Okay, bye." Then she hung up. I knew something was up, but I wasn't sure what. I supposed she was speaking to Jim, but I couldn't be sure. Coincidentally, Jim called me that very evening. It was just after dinner when I was outside on the patio. It was Friday, and Jenny was sleeping over at a friend's house and would return Saturday afternoon. I saw the caller ID on my phone and debated whether to take the call. Carol suddenly trotted outside. "Is that your phone, honey?" she asked me as it was ringing. Now I knew it was a setup. "Why don't you answer it, Mark?" I grunted and picked it up. "What do you want, a-hole?" I grumbled, knowing it was Jim. "Hi, buddy, I just wanted to talk," he said cheerfully. Carol was watching me as I replied, "Oh yeah? Well, I want a faithful, loving, honest wife, so what?" "Listen, Mark, I know things have been a little tense between us, so I wanted to do something to break the ice." I didn't reply. "I'm having a little get-together at my house. I want to invite you and Carol to join us. It's just a few of our friends that are invited. It's all nice folks from the area that you know. I'm going to cook out, so you don't have to bring anything. Just show up and have a good time." I was silent as I considered his offer. The truth is that I was feeling a little regretful the past few days. Despite my anger, I still loved Carol. I know she missed having a social life like we used to and wished I could entertain her better. Jim used to be a good friend, my best friend actually. Despite my feelings, I missed having some guy to hang out with. I noticed that Carol was nearby, staring out at the yard but was clearly pretending she wasn't listening. These two were so transparent, it was almost funny. "I don't know, please Mark. I know how you feel, but we can't go on like this forever. Let's bury the hatchet for a while and have a few beers with friends. Bring Carol, and I'm sure we can all put this beside us, okay?" I glanced at Carol. She looked over and smiled. "We'll see. I'll speak to Carol, and we'll see. I hope you come, both of you." It's just casual. I have all the food and beer taken care of, so don't worry about bringing anything. I know you'll have a blast, buddy. Hope to see you later. I sat down the phone, and Carol immediately asked, "Who was that, honey?" "Nobody," I replied. Carol looked perplexed. "Nobody?" "Tell me," she asked sweetly, as if she didn't know. "Having a party," I said indifferently. "Oh, really?" she exclaimed, smiling. "That's nice." "Yeah, he wants us to go." "He wants to bury the hatchet," I replied. Carol seemed eager to speak, but she just smiled and asked, "So, what did you tell him?" "Are we going?" "I guess so," I replied. She jumped over to me and hugged me close. After so long apart, I felt myself becoming aroused by the warmth of her body. "Oh, goody, that's great, Mark," she gushed. "I know we'll have a great time." "Don't count on it," I snorted. She kissed my cheek, then bolted for the house to get ready. I was leery about this whole setup, but I was worn down from all the acrimony and was willing to see how this turned out. Either way, Carol couldn't blame me for not trying to improve our situation. As for Jim and I becoming friends again, that was doubtful. The party was actually quite nice. There were about 30 people there, which was more than I expected. Jim went all out with the food and drinks. Most of the people were married couples, with a few unattached females and a couple of single guys. There were enough people there that it wasn't obvious that I was keeping my distance from Jim. Carol stayed by me much of the time. She did go off with her friends for a while, and I hung with the guys. I drank some beer, but not too much. I wasn't going to get drunk and suddenly act like everything was back to normal. I think Carol noticed my distant demeanor. "Is everything okay?" she whispered. I didn't look at her as I mumbled, "Yeah, nice party, isn't it, though? I'm having fun." "I hope you're too," she said, gazing into my eyes hopefully. Then she asked quietly, "Have you spoken to Jim?" My expression darkened, and she noticed. "Sorry, I don't want to upset you, Mark." "Then just leave it alone. You two were such good friends, and I hope you will be again." "Forget it, Carol," I told her with a cool glance. "Jim and I will never be friends again, not like before. He's an a-hole, and always will be. Let's just have fun tonight and not bring up some bad old memories." Carol didn't drink much, and neither did I. Jim was busy playing host and only came over a couple of times to ask how everything was. He had a woman with him, some hot chick he knew at work, and they were sharing the host duties. Carol drifted over to Jim and his date. They spoke for a while. When Carol returned, she brought Jim's date over and introduced me. I just nodded and let my wife do all the talking. I don't even remember her name. She probably thought I'm an idiot for not acting more polite, but screw her and screw Jim too. After a few more minutes of awkward conversation, they went over to the bar and mixed some drinks. Later, Jim put on some music, and people began to dance. Carol asked me if I wanted to dance. I said no. She was a bit put off, but didn't complain about it. The sun began to set, and the couples with children began to leave. The rest of the crowd began to drink more. A few other couples showed up and joined in. Soon, the beer was flowing freely, and the party was starting to get rowdy. Several of the wives we knew were no longer dancing with their spouses. A couple of guys asked Carol to dance. She wearily accepted after getting my tacit permission. I stayed in my seat and just watched her in silence. Carol is an attractive woman, so it was no shock when guys kept asking her to dance. She danced some of the fast songs, displaying her moves, which were very sexy. When the slow songs came on, she was regularly glancing at me. Normally, she could be quite flirty at events like this. Tonight she kept her flirtatious behavior to a minimum. She did seem to enjoy herself, but didn't dance too close with any of her partners, nothing like the pictures I saw of her and Jim at the charity event, and she didn't dance with Jim. When she noticed I wasn't joining in the wife-swapping atmosphere, she quit dancing and sat by me. Carol had briefly left my side and was talking with her friends when Jim's date came over and asked me to dance. I politely refused. She flashed a pout and asked if I wanted another beer. I told her no thanks. She was a pretty young thing, cute with a nice body, typical of the girls Jim always had around him. But I had no interest in her and tried to give non-verbal hints that I didn't want her company. Instead of getting the hint, she plopped down next to me, gulped her beer, flashed a huge grin, and started a conversation. She wouldn't leave, so to be polite, I chatted with her. She seemed a little drunk and kept giggling at things I said that weren't funny. Between giggles, she kept touching me, rubbing my arm and my leg, while laughing. She kept offering to get me another beer, I kept refusing, and she kept trying to get me up to dance. At one point, she stood up and began pulling on my arm, making a big scene in front of the people around us. Everyone was laughing at my reluctance. I was embarrassed and asked her to stop. She stopped and began talking for a while before she did it again, but this time she slipped and accidentally fell onto my lap. I tried to get her to her feet, but she resisted. She just stayed there, laughing, rubbing her tight little bum on my groin, with her arms around my neck. Thank you for watching part 1. Please subscribe to the channel and please click the link to part 2 below the description. If you find these content useful, please share them with your friends and family. Thank you for your support, and have a great day.